Hello, welcome to another segment with She Who Cooks. I'm Audrey, and today I will be sharing with you a recipe from my very own recipe book entitled She Who Cooks, and I'd like to share with you how to make handmade pasta at home. Now, the pasta dish I'd like to share with you today is essentially a salmon fettuccine in a lemon cream based sauce. A lot of times we think that handmade pasta is something you can get only in fancy Italian restaurants. Well, that doesn't always have to be the case. So today I'd like to show you how you can make that at home very simply, very quickly, for 1 or 2 people, using ingredients you can find in your everyday supermarkets. Now, good pasta starts with good flour. And everyone always tells you, buy Tipo 00 flour for the best types of pasta in terms of texture. Now, that's not something you can get in your everyday supermarket in most parts of Asia. So after much experimentation, I've come up with a blend that you can get almost from any store out there. Now, firstly, we need to weigh our flour. I found that the ideal mix is actually 50% bread flour and 50% plain flour. Now, when you're making pasta for 2 people, typically 100 grams of flour will suffice, and you can put together the 100 grams of flour with just simply 1 egg. So let's start by measuring our flour today. First, I'd like to put in 50 grams of bread flour, just a little bit more. Right, there you go. And I'll follow that with 50 grams of plain flour. Now, you don't have to be terribly exact on this. Essentially, eggs come in different sizes as well. And the guideline of 100 grams of flour to 1 egg is really something that you can vary. As you can see, the egg I've got today is actually a rather small egg. Now, when that happens, you can actually add in other flavorants to your pasta, or you can add in a little bit of olive oil for a softer texture. So what you want to do first is to make a little well in the middle of the flour, and you want to crack it in your egg. Now, I like to store my olive oil in little beer bottles that I've washed and reused. I put in a little spout, and every month or so I change the bottle, and this keeps my oil very fresh. So what I want to do here is add in perhaps just about half a tablespoon of oil. I'll put that in the middle of the well, and I would break up the egg yolk and slowly stir in the flour. Do come a little closer so you can have a look at how this is done. So you can see it starts off as a very tight slurry, right, as you incorporate more flour in. Now, this looks like very little moisture and a lot of flour. Don't be worried about that, simply because when all of this is kneaded together, you would be able to form a ball of dough that's well hydrated. Now, typically I use a fork or a spoon for this part of the procedure because I don't want to get my hands too gummy. But once you can see it starting to come together as a little bit of dough, then you want to put down the spoon. Yeah, make sure you get all the bits of egg and dough off, and get your hands in there and get really messy. Essentially, what you want to do is to use your knuckles, which are the stronger parts of your hand, to sort of push the dough together to incorporate the flour. I want to form a nice tight ball of dough that doesn't stick to my fingers. Now, this process doesn't usually take more than 5 or 10 minutes. And as you knead, you can see the flour being incorporated. There's absolutely no need to make sure that the dough is kneaded till it is super smooth, because until you rest it, you won't get a very smooth ball of dough. Instead, you get something that's a little ugly looking, but it's all to the good. So now, when most of the flour has been incorporated, you kind of want to pick up the ball of dough and just squish it in your hands. I basically want to work it until it's a little bit more smooth, a little bit more hydrated, right? And soon what I get is a rather rough, dumpy looking ball of dough, like this. I'll set it aside and I'll wrap it with cling film. Now, once you've formed your little ball of dough, you really want to wrap it tightly in a piece of cling film, right? And set it aside to rest for at least 10 to 15 minutes. Now, during this 10 to 15 minutes, what's happening is that the individual grains of starch are getting fully hydrated. And you know, if you decide to jump the gun and try to roll out your pasta now, I'm afraid you won't get a very nice texture. Let me show you what I mean. This is a ball of dough that has rested for about 20 minutes. And this is the one we've just made. As you can see, the one that has rested is a lot smoother. It's actually softer to the touch. And the dough is moist but not sticky. Now this is a little drier, a little harder to the touch, and definitely does not have a smooth surface. Does anything special happen in this meantime? Definitely not. Leave it alone for 15 to 20 minutes, then come back and roll out your pasta. Alright, so let's start the rolling out process. Now first I would like to have a little bit of plain flour on the side of my working surface so that I can flour my rollers nicely. And I like to work with the dough in sections simply because a smaller quantity of dough is really a lot easier to handle. So I will break off half of this. And any dough that you do not use, you must leave covered up with cling film or it'll dry out. So I have a smooth little lump of dough here. I'll knead it a little bit, just to make sure that there are no bits that haven't been incorporated nicely. And then I will flour it just a little bit. Now when it comes to hand rolling, I must warn you, this does take a bit of strength. You really want to roll out the pasta firmly. Now because this is something that has quite a bit of gluten due to the high protein content of the bread flour, it's going to be a bit more difficult to roll out because the dough is very elastic. Yeah, and what you want to do is just continue flipping the dough in between so it doesn't stick to your working surface. And as you are rolling out the dough, you're essentially working the dough, right, to develop the gluten in the dough a little further. Now the gluten, which is the protein that comes with wheat flour, is essentially what gives you the bouncy al dente texture of fresh pasta that most of us know and love. So you would continue rolling out until you get a very thin sheet. And this process can take, suppose, anywhere from 10 to even 25 minutes, depending on how quickly you're rolling it out. Now, I don't pack a lot of arm power, and I don't work out in the gym a lot. So usually, this is when I let the pasta rollers take over. Now when it comes to rolling out pasta using pasta rollers, you can always cheat and use the wider setting to help you sort of knead the dough. What do I mean? Every time I run a piece of dough through the pasta rollers, the dough is actually being worked. Now as I work that multiple times, you can actually feel the dough getting silky to the touch and a lot lighter. And that's essentially the texture that we want for really good handmade pasta. Now first you want to check that your pasta rollers are set on the wider setting and turn it on. You want to gently run the dough through the set of rollers. You can see it's got stretched out. Fold it in three and go again. Now the dough starts to feel a little bit sticky or more moist. You want to just dust it with a little bit of flour, fold it up, and put it through the rollers again, still on the wider setting. Now, typically I do this at least 10 times because I want to make sure that my pasta dough is kneaded to the optimum texture. Now as the dough passes through the rollers, you can feel that it becomes smoother and silkier to the touch. Now that's essentially the texture that we're looking for. for perfectly silky yet al dente handmade pasta. Once your pasta dough has reached its desired texture, what you want to do is roll it down to an even thinner dough before cutting it into noodles of the shape and size that you want for your meal. Now, most pasta rollers have settings running from 1 to 8, denoting the different levels of thickness. Typically, I would run the dough through each level of thickness at least twice to ensure that it is even throughout. Now once you've rolled your pasta to the thickness that you would like for your noodles, now I've rolled it to setting number 5. You're now ready to cut your pasta sheet into individual noodles. Firstly, I'll flour the sheet a little bit, just to make sure it doesn't stick. Although I would say that once your pasta has reached the correct texture, you will not find it sticking to the rollers at all. Now I have a fettuccine cutter here, and what the cutter does is it cuts the noodles into an even width. Now, if you don't have a cutter, it's really simple to do it really. You just want to fold the pasta in half, roll it up, and cut yourself some individual strands. Now, since I have a cutter, I'll make use of that today. So I'll turn it on at the minimum speed, and I'll carefully feed the sheet down the middle. It's like magic. A single sheet goes in and noodles come right out. Now once you have your noodles cut, you want to dust a little bit of flour on them so that they don't stick. I tend to like to drop the individual strands onto my working surface, toss a little bit more flour on them, and just very lightly toss them so that they become entirely coated with a very light dusting of flour. Once that's done, you can pick up your portion and set it aside ready to cook. Now for everyone who's really concerned about portion control, I know you're wondering, how much handmade pasta can one person eat? Myself, I tend to find that half a batch of what we made, so 50 grams of dough, suits me fine. Now for people with a larger appetite or growing boys at home, you might want to make them about 75 grams. Remember though, that handmade pasta tends to be a lot heartier than the dried stuff. So you don't want to go on an overload on it. After all, it's still carbohydrates. Now the type of pasta I'd like to make today for you guys is a smoked salmon pasta with a lemon cream sauce. So what I have here is a generous portion of smoked salmon. Now this I would feel is alright for one person who's greedy like me. Or if you don't like so much salmon in your meal, you can feel free to reduce the portion. You also need 1 lemon because we're going to use both the zest and the juice in the pasta. Now you really want to cook your handmade pasta in boiling salted water. And it's really important for the water to be salted because that is the first layer of flavor you add into your food. So what I have here is a big old pot of boiling water. I've not salted it yet. And as a rule of thumb, I would add something like 1 teaspoon of salt for every liter of water. And I've got about, say, 2 liters here. And I want to make sure that the water comes to a rolling boil before I put that down. So my water is boiling furiously. And this is when I just simply pop the pasta into the pot. Now while the pasta is boiling, I've got about 5 minutes to get this done. I want to quickly snip perhaps 2/3 of the salmon into small pieces that I can stir into the sauce. And I would want to leave perhaps 1 or 2 pieces whole for a garnish later on. Now while the pasta is boiling, I want to heat up a pan over medium heat and add something like 1 tablespoon of butter to the pan. Now whilst that's melting, I add half a cup of cream. I also want to add a touch of water so that the cream doesn't burn. Now while the cream is being heated up, what I want to do is just grate in a little amount of lemon zest, just a touch. And now when you're grating the zest, you really want only the color from the rind of the fruit. You don't want the bitter pith that goes on underneath. And the lemon zest is where the main flavors of the lemon are, and this gives your sauce a really bright citrus feel to it. Next thing is I want to add a little squeeze of lemon to the sauce, and once that's added you want to quickly whisk to combine because you don't want the acid from the lemon to separate the cream to form a sticky oily mess. Now right before I toss in the pasta, I want to grate down a little bit of cheese. Now you can use any hard Italian cheese like a Pecorino Romano or Parmigiano. What I'm using today is a Grana Padano cheese. Now this adds a little bit of salt and helps to thicken the sauce as well. Now about 5 minutes have passed, and I want to pull my pasta out of the boiling water. As you can see, it has been cooked, just perhaps a tad under, which is great because I want to finish cooking it in the sauce to give it maximum flavor. So I'll drain the pasta, and I will just simply toss that into the sauce. Whilst the pasta is cooking, I want to quickly add down the salmon bits that we cut up earlier. Now this is where a pair of tongs really comes in handy. And you simply want to lightly toss the pasta and the salmon together so that the flavors start to meld and come together very nicely in the pan, and so that your cream sauce neatly coats every delightful strand. Once your pasta has been nicely tossed with the sauce, you want to carefully pick it up with your pair of tongs and place it neatly in the middle of your choice of serving plate. Make sure you toss on the bits of salmon and the rest of the sauce. We still have the last couple of pieces of salmon that we reserved. And these we want to just nicely place on the side of the plate as a little treat for the diner. You can make them into a little rosette, little cones, sprinkle it on the side, and place it on the top quite simply. Now as a final touch, I like to sprinkle on a little bit of dried dill. Now if you have the fresh ones, they'll do very beautifully as well, but it is quite a hassle to stock fresh herbs sometimes. So in the absence of fresh dill, you can always get some dried dill leaf tips from major spice brands that are available in the supermarkets. So there you have it, a simple handmade pasta with smoked salmon and a lemon cream sauce. Now that we're done with the cooking segment of the show, we can get to the eating segment, which is really my favorite part. Now as you can see, this pasta is so silky, so bouncy, and I can smell the lemon and the dill wafting up at me. So let's take a bite. This is simply delicious, and I wish you all at home could taste this. The pasta is really silky. smooth to the tongue. It also has some resistance to the bite, or what the Italians like to call al dente. And the salty fishiness of the salmon is perfectly complemented by the acid citrus brightness of the lemon. Now, I hope you all would give this recipe a try. It is so simple, so easy to make, with ingredients you can find in your everyday supermarkets.